This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. There has been a sentiment going around with Browns fans and kind of like a anger going around with Browns fans. I do think it's interesting and rooted in something, even if like the solutions that come from that anger, I don't really agree with. But I hear Browns fans say a lot, it feels like the team does not care about them, which is interesting, right? Because we've been through eras where it feels like the Browns don't care about winning. But it never really felt like they were indifferent to their fan base. And to talk about this, I want to bring in somebody who I think is going to be great for this conversation. Abby Mueller, make sure you follow her, all of her YouTube projects and on social media. But Ab, you've heard this sentiment out there that it does feel like the fans aren't being thought of or cared of. Do you think this is a byproduct, as much as we like Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry and some of the things that they've done? Do you think this is a byproduct of how they kind of operate about things that has created this feeling? Because it makes no sense that this run is as polarizing as it is, despite it being the most successful regime since coming back in '99. Like, it shouldn't be this polarizing, even in a bad season like this.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Just the way they keep their cards so close to their chest, don't really want to give out too much information, that sometimes I think it can almost come off as like pompous or like condescending to be like, oh, I'm not gonna, I know the fans are upset. Everyone's aware of it, but they're not really still giving too much.
And it can feel like you're like alienating them at times too.
100%. And I think that is compounded with just how terribly everything has gone. Number one, I think even the original decision and not knowing who made the decision to bring DeShaun Watson in, a lot of people have some built up resentment for that. Then the decision to not bench him and be forced into not playing him because of his injury, I think that continued some resentment. So then I think when people see Kevin or Andrew Berry speaking to the media, and still just not really giving too much, being very, and that's how they've always been. It's not like it's a new thing. I think it can really rub some people the wrong way. And look, I'm not saying like I think organizations should make decisions just to please their fans, because I think that's like a dangerous road to go down if you start just doing wherever the wind blows that week or that season and just kind of following the way. But I do think I can understand why fans feel owed a certain amount from the organization, because I mean, truly, without the fans, the league doesn't exist as it does. So I get why fans feel entitled in a way to some of it, but at the same time, I think having the balance that Andrew and Kevin have is why this organization isn't at like even in a worse position right now. Like, if you have some hotheads in there, I think things could be much worse from a internal aspect. So I think, there are the pros and cons with the way that they operate.
I think the thing is I think what makes people mad isn't that they're not super reactionary. I think the thing that makes people mad, in like at the end of the day, I know there's what people say makes them mad, but I think what rubs people the wrong way about them is the secrecy. Like, it feels like every time the Browns do something, they're doing something behind our backs.
Yeah.
Right. Like
small things too. Like,
yeah. And it's like small stuff that you absolutely don't have to be this way about. And I don't know why they feel like they have to do this or be sneaky, or like sometimes like with what they do with the salary cap. There's no reason that you can't just explain that to folks. Like, they should not have to jump on a video of me and Jack Duffin where we have to explain the strategy to people in order to get it through, right? Like, that's them not using the bully pulpit, right? Like, they have the platform as the Cleveland Browns to be able to say, hey, we're going to do these experimental strategies. this is what we're doing, and be able to explain it clearly. Hell, you got a video department. You could put together a nice graphic, have Andrew Siciliano voice it over. Maybe you bring in Joe Thomas to voice it over, right? People love Joe Thomas, right? Like, you just bring in Joe, let him explain it, have a nice little graphic, and then boom, nobody's asking these questions or panicking about the salary cap because you have tried to explain this. And I think that is the problem with what how the Browns operate. Is like, okay, you're doing new things, but I don't think you're understanding that what you're doing is new. It's like if you were in 2005 and an iPhone pops out and somebody's like, you're like, how do I use this? How do I go about it? And then like, Steve Jobs is like, yeah, go fuck yourself. You'll figure it out for yourself, right? Like, and you're just like, well, I'm not going to use this then. Like, even though it's superior to everything that's out there, like even at first iPhone, you look at and they went out of their way to make sure that you can intuitively understand what each button does. They use like, well, I forget what the term is, but it's designed that mimics real life, even though it's digital. Somebody give me that term. I know I got graphic designers in the comment section. Yeah, somebody give me that term there, but that is to make sure that, hey, people understand this new thing that you're doing. And that's, I think, the chief problem with the Browns is like, they are confident in what they're doing, and for good reason. They're very smart, they're all of this, but they don't do a good job of explaining what's happening to people. And I do think that you need to explain to people what's happening, and it's not just so we feel good. It's just so that the misinformation has a less chance to spread, because when you don't explain your cap strategy is anything. When you don't explain why you're putting this player or cutting this player before 53 cut downs, even though he's a projected starter, it feels like panic, right? Like, there's a way to do this and explain, hey, this is what we're doing. Even if you don't want to do it directly, you have people in the media that you can float things out to and explain this to them, and, you know, suggest that they write an article about it, right? Like, that's
everyone knows who those people are. The fans know what media members would be giving that information.
And the fact that there has not been a single "here's the cap explained by Mary Kay" article or the people who are closer to the building, I'm like, why aren't you doing that? Like, they seem to operate in a way where they think like public opinion is irrelevant. Yeah. And I think that shows. And I think people catch on to that, and people don't like that, rightfully so. And if I wish I could be in the building and be like, hey, it does matter if the people who show up like you, right? Like, you could be right all you want, but there's a reason why people are like, yeah, we should just switch to Mike Vrabel, even though Mike Vrabel was not successful his last few years in Tennessee, right? Because people like Mike Vrabel. And right now, what you've given them in the public and like how you've gone about these decisions, it makes people not like you, or it makes it really easy to paint a picture of what you're doing to seem extremely uncharitable, you know? Yeah. And they don't do a good job of defending themselves because they don't even attempt to, right? And that's the thing I don't understand why they don't do that more. It's like, hey, explain what you're doing. Like, let people know, because like, even if I say it and Jack Duffin says it, we're not the Cleveland Browns. There's like, more people are gonna like understand that because it's the Cleveland Browns saying that versus like some guy on a YouTube show.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like too, when they're doing it with these smaller decisions that seem like it wouldn't be a problem for them to give that information, I think that opens up room for people to have these larger conspiracies about the organization and about a lot of the bigger decisions they make, because they're like, okay, if you're like being coy about this small thing that seems irrelevant, then what are you hiding about X, Y, and Z decision? Or what are you not telling us about what's going on here? So I think, like you mentioned, it was perfect with the, you know, it opens it up for misinformation. Like, that's where all people bring in these different like thoughts and ideas that are probably not actually true. But if you're not saying anything else, then people are going to fill in the blank themselves.
And if you're not doing a good job of even communicating that, like, it's the lack of using what they have to their disposal to kind of like explain what they're trying to do. And like the stuff that they're doing, it's not that difficult to explain. And it's not like, oh, they're not tanking, right? I understand you can't explain tanking, right?
Yeah.
Because that's being complicit in an activity that's illegal by NFL bylines, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Right.
cannot do that. But nothing they're doing is illegal or in a gray area. They're just moving money down the line and betting on the market to keep rising. And that's just what they need to explain to people. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing. I get that you don't want to drop a 13-page document about how we're going to work around the DeShaun Watson contract. I get it. But
Yes.
you can float the ideal of like, hey, this is how we're going to work around this hardship potentially to somebody who could write about that officially, right? Like these are things that you could do. But when you decide to close yourself off and look, I hate the war that, especially in football, it seems like people are constantly, like players are at war with the media, the organizations at war with the media, and the fan base is at war with the media, and then the media returns and goes to war with everybody else. And it's like the whole point of this is you have to understand that y'all both need each other. Like this job is meaningless if there's no football to talk about, right?
Yep.
And also on the other end, the people can help you. Like the media can help you get some things out that you really need to be understood. But everybody wants to be so closed off and tight to their vest in this organization that it leaves a lot of people to speculate.
Yeah.
And some of these people don't know how the cap work, and they're speculating, and then they're spreading that to wider audiences, right? And it would just be helpful if you would just be more open to saying, hey, this is what our plan is right now. If that plan changes, you can let people know that plan changes. Yeah. But I don't understand why NFL teams in general feel this need to be this closed off. I don't understand. Like another thing that bugs me about how NFL teams are. Why are we hiding formations in practices?
I was going to say, that's weird because I feel like all of it is weird because I also think fans are a lot smarter now than they used to be. Like if you look back, I would say, even if you look back 20 years ago in sports, not just football, but sports in general, like I think the knowledge that we have now as fans, just between like the different media worlds that exist now with podcasts, YouTube, the internet, like access to analytics and information that you would not previously have access to, I think it's made people a lot smarter. So it's almost like dumbing us down more to be like, yeah, you guys can't handle this very basic information. It's like, no, I think if you just explain it and what you're doing, like the fans are smart enough to be able to take that in and to handle it. And they want that information so they can be more engaged with their team. Like I think fans are more involved now than they've ever been before with the ins and outs of what is happening in the organization.
Yeah. And it's like something like cap strategy, especially. It's like you have to explain that because like the cap is very difficult to understand. And a lot of people work very long in the NFL and don't really have a good grasp on it because the rules change and different things mean different things depending on like what the league revenue number is. And there's a million different opinions on it. But if we know what your strategy is, we're not debating on like, are you going to have to cut Nick Chubb in 2025 or something like that? Or if we are, there's something to point to like, it's just bullshit, guys. And we can move on to the next conversation. And I think that comes down to the core of this because I know people get mad at me sometimes when I say this, but I'm like, the thing about being a fan is that it's not always about winning as many games as possible. Obviously, that's something that you would love to do. The Cavs are undefeated right now. We're having a great time with that. But it's also how it happens, right? Like, I will always point back to this. The least fun I've ever had with a 50-win basketball team was like the 2015 Cavaliers because I had no time to get to learn them, right? It just felt like they transferred the Miami Heat to Cleveland and just got rid of all these guys I've been watching for like the last 3 years. I was getting excited about Andrew Wiggins and like, yeah, I'm happy LeBron's here, but I had no connection really to that team because they just took away all of it. And it's like, oh, well, I'm glad they're winning. They have the Cavs jersey on, but it didn't feel the same. 2016 comes around and you got some guys that you really feel a connection with. J.R. Smith, Iman Shumpert, basically what became the core of the LeBron Cavs team. And it felt much different, right, when they won. And I think that part matters in football. Like, people want to know that the guys that they watch on the field care. That's why Jed Wills drives people crazy, because it doesn't feel like he cares. And he keeps doing stuff that confirms that he doesn't care. And people don't like that. And I think what drives people crazy about Kevin is that it's not always obvious that Kevin cares. But I think that's a misread on it, because Kevin does care more than anybody. He's a crazy madman about this stuff, but he's not going to wear it on his sleeve all the time. Like, you can see it because when Kevin snaps on the sideline, that is a snapping of a man who cares, right? Like, the few times it's happened where you're like, okay, he snapped there. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes it's hard to tell like how much this regime actually cares. And you also have to be extra careful with this fan base because they sat through years of teams actually not trying to win, right? Like, relatively recently. So we're always worried that whoever's in charge isn't actually trying to win games the most. So much so I was watching ESPN 850 app and like Tony Grossi was like, I don't understand why they're still trying to win. And I was like, what? Like, no, there should be pressure to win. You should always have pressure to win. That is not a good thing if like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are like, nah, we're safe. We can go 2 and whatever. Like, we're fine. Like, that's not good.
Yeah. I think, I mean, we've talked about this before, like how much winning matters, no matter, if you have 1 win or you have 2 wins, just in terms of like putting the effort forth. So like you said, that the fans can see that the effort's there, that everyone knows the effort's there. And I mentioned this on another show we were on earlier this week, but the win over the Ravens, like, that is proof enough that like, even when you're a bad team, like, the fans just want to see you trying. And the fact that brought a lot of people a lot of joy on, a random game that really didn't end up mattering for anything. Like, it's still, people just want to see that the effort is out there, and they got to see that in that game.
Yeah. People spend a lot of time on sports, right? Like, people spend a lot of their life on sports. They spend a lot of their energy on sports. And at the end of the day, you don't want to make people feel like an asshole every weekend for loving a football team. Right. Yeah. And when you tank, you make somebody feel like an asshole every weekend for loving a football team. Right. Yeah. You don't want to make people feel embarrassed by your team. And I think that's why winning is important. Right. Like, it's not just important culturally within that locker room. I think it's important. Like, if you want the fans to have more tolerance for when the team struggles so they don't boo maniacally at a team, well, guess what you got to do? You got to win more games. Right. Yeah. Pittsburgh don't boo on a whim. Right? Because they have won enough to be like, okay, well, we get it. Sometimes you lose a game. It's not that big of a deal. But when you're used to losing and you're always like anxious about, like, the Browns fans are in this constant place of like, if you ever got like a job that took you out of where you grew up in from like a tax bracket sense, and it's like, you're always worried about going back, right? Like, every day I'm always worried about, is this going to be the day where I have to go back, right? And that Browns fans have that concerns, right? Where it's like every season we're worried that we're going to have to go back to Colt McCoy and playing Brandon Whedon and being afraid of that. And it's like, you need to, even when you have a bad year, you need to try to get to 500. You need to try to get over 500, because that will make people go, oh, okay, our bad years, we used to celebrate. Okay, we're not going back, right? Like, that's not going to be what happens. But that, I think, is the fundamental fear of a lot of Browns fans, is like, they are worried that they're going to go back to being the embarrassment that they were from 99 to about 2018. And nobody wants to go back to that. And I think, again, because we switch out guys so often, we don't get to this point. But I really think the people in charge have to understand that about the fan base. Yeah. And that's why the fan base can get so crazy. And it's not really their fault. Like, some people are just assholes, but it's not the majority of fans' fault for not having confidence in Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry right now. It's Kevin and Andrew's fault, for one, You got to win more games. If you win more games this season, then people will start to calm down a little bit. But two, learn from this. Think about this. The DeShaun Watson thing. If you're going to do something that deeply unpopular, you have to work with the understanding that this is unpopular. Instead of just rolling him in thinking he's going to have an introductory press conference like he's a franchise quarterback. Like, you have to be aware of the fact that if you're going to do something unpopular, it is not popular. There are reasons, real reasons that people don't like it. And that could be they feel like you're disrespecting somebody that they see as a legend in Baker Mayfield, right? Like we've seen that happen with Bill Belichick where he didn't realize that. And that got him kind of kicked out when the team moved to Baltimore, was how he handled the whole Bernie Kosar thing. It's like, you have to understand, if you're going to do something unpopular, it's unpopular. You got to work around it a little bit more delicately than just saying, hey, deal with it, right? Because that's going to make people resent you, even if it ain't that deep. Even if you're just cutting somebody that they kind of like. It's like Rashad Higgins, right? It's like, it's going to drive people off the edge if you keep making it seem like just fucking deal with it. Because you deal with enough of that in your regular life. You're not trying to deal with that from your football team too.
Yeah, I think too, almost the disparity between like the fans and the players and coaches in terms of like you mentioned, the fans are investing so much money into this team. They're investing time every week. And then, if they look at these players and coaches who are making significantly more money than they're making, it does, I think that rubs people the wrong way sometimes if they feel like those people don't care as much as they do when they're the ones investing their time and money in, and, the players and coaches are making what they do. And I think that's a fair feeling to have when you're like, especially the people who buy season tickets, and then on resale right now, you can get tickets for very cheap for a Browns game. They're kind of like, oh, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I, invested my money in. So I would be upset too.
Yeah. And that's like, if I had any notes for Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, specifically Andrew Berry, I'm like, we gotta stop being so cynical with the decision making, right? And I mean that in the definition of doing something without regard for how it's going to be received publicly. Yeah. Right. And like thinking that the only thing that matters is the win total. It's not the case. How people feel about this matters. It just does. You can't live in a fantasy world where it's like, oh, we win, it doesn't matter. Because let me tell you something, there would be a lot more fans disinvolved with this team, even if they were successful, just because they don't like it, right? Like there was a reason why I felt like more fans were rooting for the Browns when Joe Flacco was the quarterback versus like when they had a similar record with DeShaun Watson here as the quarterback. It matters how people feel about this. And I know we've been trained because like part of the internet age is like this whole ideal of like, it don't matter. It only matters if you win. You should tank. The emotions are irrelevant. You should just try to do your best to put yourself in a position to win. And it's like, no, man. We care about sports not because it's logical. We are literally 100,000 of us go and watch these dudes run around in pads to put a football in a sacred patch of grass. Like that's literally what we're doing. This shit is not logical. Like you're not going to figure out the heart of football by looking at it strictly through a logical lens, because it's not even logical to play football. Like, it's the least logical sport to play. It is an emotional sport at the end of the day. The things that bring us to this game are the emotions that the sport creates. And yes, do you want to have a certain temperament as your head coach? So I think Kevin Stefanski has a good temperament to be a head. Yes, I like that he's not a hothead. But also, in your press conferences, if you're losing, might want to, have that frustration come through a little bit of where you're at with the team. Don't mean you got to throw people under the bus, but you want people to come out. You want Daryl Ryder to come out there. It was a fiery press conference, right? Like you want there to be some kind of emotion attached to it so people know that you care about it, because indifference is poison in sports. Like that is what we come here for. We come here for the emotional aspect of it, because this whole thing is just emotion. right?
Yeah.
Like there's some logic in there, there's some concrete stuff here, but at the end of the day, you watch football because you like when the team with your colors on score football in the sacred part of the grass. That means you get 7 fictional points. Like that is what we like about it, and we attach a lot of emotions to this, and it matters. We have emotions about these players, we have feelings about how things should be done, where they play, and like with moving the stadium, I get it. I want them to have the dome. I don't mind the dome being in Brook Park, but you can't be an asshole about moving the stadium because that location to where the Browns are, it means something to a lot of people. Right. Like you got it. Like if you're Jimmy Haslam, I hope he understands. You got to offer some sort of a penance to the city. Like that is why they're fighting so hard for it. It's not logical. They have no shot of stopping it, but still offer them some level of concession, right? Yeah. Because you don't want to be a jerk about this whole thing and rub people the wrong way and have the emotions they associate with that Browns team in Brook Park be super negative. And the next thing you know, one of the most reliable fan bases on earth is not that anymore. And it's like you gotta, how people feel about this, it matters. And I think that's the biggest flaw that they've had, is that they have not operated in a way where they have seemed to really take that into account in any significant way that has been able to avoid any of these issues that they run into.
I think almost the fact that they are such a process over results type of organization, like, you know, works against them in some ways. And I don't think that is a bad practice. Like, I think if you believe in a certain process, you should go back to that, you know, just because something didn't work one time. Even with the DeShaun Watson move, I think it is good process to try to go after a top 5 quarterback that you think can change your team. And just because that one didn't work doesn't mean I don't think that they should completely change what their mindset is as an organization. But like you said, I do think that they lose the emotion aspect of it when that is how they are operating all the time. And it's easy. And I feel like the information age of like analytics, film breakdowns, everything being so focused on, you know, the X's and O's and what's happening on the field, that it is easy to forget that there's a lot of emotion and people involved in it that feel some type of way. And you're never going to change that. Like I always say, you know, I'm like, I couldn't try to cheer for another football team. Like it would not be possible for me to be a fan of another NFL team. Even if I put full effort in to do that, there is something about cheering for the team that you love, like you said, that it does matter and it is meaningful. I feel like I've, you know, tried to get, I can watch any NFL game and enjoy it, but it will never compare to the emotion that you feel for the guys in your city and the team that you root for. And I agree. I think they need to remember that more often and not necessarily switch up everything, become totally different people, just incorporate a little bit more of that into the way they speak to everyone.
Yeah, because I'm all for a process over results.
Yeah.
But also it's like, explain the process. Right? People will get behind a process if you explain it to them, right? If you're like, okay, yeah, this is what the process is, right? Like if they're going to draft the quarterback, don't be super secretive about what the freaking plan is for the quarterback. Just let us know. Like, you don't got to tell us when you're going to start him or anything like that. I get that. But it's like, no, we expect that this is going to be somebody who could be a starter. If you draft him in the second round, make that declaration that we think that this guy could be a starter, right? Like, don't try to like sneak around it and hide around it and leave a lot of room for speculation because like I think they've been operating on the sense that it doesn't matter, but like in Cleveland it does matter because that shit's going to show up on the field and the fans are going to boo you super hard because they're frustrated with where the team is. Like you want to coach and run a team that has a passionate fan base, you got to deal with the fan base too. And I think that has been the biggest issue is like, I don't mind the process over results. I don't mind how you operate. It's just, you got to do a better job of explaining to folks what it is you're trying to do and why this is actually better for them in the long run, because the messaging on that front has been awful. It's been left basically to like podcasters to explain. And when podcasters are explaining it, it's just cope, right?
Yeah.
It's just, oh, they're just protecting Andrew Berry or whatever it is, right?
Yes.
And it's like there's only but so much you can do there. It's up to them to defend how they want to operate and also let you know that they care. And those are things that they could very easily learn to do if they're told that they need to do it. And I think that is part of it, right? And I think they're moving closer to that direction. You can see they've made these steps because I think the same issues that we have as fans were existing within the locker room structures of the Cleveland Browns. And then they brought in coaches like Mike Vrabel's in there. They got Jim Schwartz, guys who kind of understand the locker room culture so that they could be like, hey, you got to explain this. Because how many times did we hear somebody say, I didn't know what I was supposed to do? They just were telling me to do something, right? Because they weren't explaining this stuff. And they learned they had to explain to the players. And I think they're learning right now just how real shit can get in Cleveland and that you got to explain this shit to the fans too. Like you just got to make some kind of attempt to do it. And that's where if they make it through this season, they have to understand that mistake because if they do this again, they're not going to survive it.
Yeah, I feel like some self-reflection would be good. And even when I'm thinking about the process over results type mindset that they have, like I think another way they probably could self-reflect on it was, you know, how they were thinking about the original decision to bring in DeShaun, where I think they were focusing so much on the field person that they didn't really even think about like how mentally it would affect him. Maybe they ignored some of the emotion of what making a move like that does, not just for the fans, but for the actual player that you're getting. And I think when they focus so much on just the mechanics of it all, I think that leaves out some of the fact that the players are humans too, along with the fans. Like they are emotional beings that are going to be affected by what's happening around them. And I think that's another way that they probably could use some reflection.
Hey, how you feel up here changes how you could do your job, right?
Everyone's I think in their own jobs and, you know, their desk job in their own life.
Yeah, but like when it comes to sports, since we got all these numbers, right? We ignore all of the people stuff, which drives me crazy, right? It's like, that's the thing with DeShaun where I'm like, I learned through this whole thing. I'm like, hey, we got to start. If somebody has an issue off the field, you got to treat that like an injury. Because like, I don't know how recovered you are from that whole thing. Like 100%. If you're even in a place to play football again, because it just never looked like Sean got to the place to play football. And because he's playing poorly, people are more hostile to the ideal of him playing football that I don't think he's ever going to get to where he ever needed to get to. And that was just always going to be the case with him, especially since he's going to a city like Cleveland. Like, because his two options were Cleveland and Charlotte. And in North Carolina, South Carolina, that's close enough to Clemson. I know it's not all of the Carolinas that Clemson encompasses, but it's close enough to Clemson's fan base that you could feel like you have a home if you're DeShaun Watson, right? Like there's always going to be a group of fans that are always going to defend you because you won them a national championship in 2014. Atlanta, he's from Atlanta. He went to Cleveland. He has no connection with Cleveland other than beating Ohio State that one time in the Fiesta Bowl pretty badly.
Pretty badly. Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, I was in a club watching that one. I was like, damn. It's bad.
There were a couple bad Clemson ones, not to reflect on all that, but.
I was like, oh, man. I think I was in college, so you might have been in college while that happened. That was rough. That was a rough one.
I remember specifically where I was watching those games.
But I think you have to look at that part of it, right? Like I hope when they go into the draft that they're just not looking at RAS scores and film and all that. Like they really like go deeper into like the question for me with this draft class, and we'll end on this is, okay, yeah, we know what Shador's done at college. We know what Jalen Milroe's done at college, but college production means nothing, right? Marcus Mariota, I had my friend Trayshawn tell me this. It just changed how I felt about this. Marcus Mariota was the most accurate quarterback to ever play college football when he came out. Didn't translate to the pros, right? Yeah. Like, but on ball percentage, downfield, he was the most accurate quarterback to have played college football, right? What you do in college is one thing, but honestly, what you're looking at in these prospects is traits physically, but also mentally. Like, do you believe that Jalen Milroe has the work ethic and the fortitude to be able to overcome his flaws and get to a place where he could be a franchise quarterback? You got to ask that same question with Shador. You got to ask that same question with Cam, because who they are right now, you're banking on that changing no matter who they are in the draft. But it's going to be the people stuff that separates it, right? And we've seen that go the wrong way for the Cleveland Browns before, where they're like, I mean, Perrion Winfrey got all the tools. And I remember falling in love with the tools, but then the person turned out to be somebody who's going to have a hard time building up on those tools. That's what I think that they, like, if there's one area where they come meet at the end of the season, this people stuff, when it comes to dealing with the fans, when it comes to looking at these prospects and figuring out who has it, who does, they need a overhaul in that department, and they need to bring some people in that understand that a little bit better than who currently does, because they've been failing on that front for 4 years, and they're not a bad GM and head coach combo, but this kind of stuff, it hurts you more than they realize. And I think they need to start realizing, hey, the people stuff, it needs to get better. Like, you need to have a better grasp on this. And like, just same way you have somebody in the building to tell you when to go for it on 3rd and 4th down, is the same way you need somebody to get in there and be like, hey, you should probably explain why you're doing this. Like, people are upset. Like, you need a people liaison as much as you need a number liaison, right? Like, ain't no shame in it. But if you need somebody, I'll volunteer for the fucking job myself, right? If you need somebody to be like, hey man, they don't like that at all, dog. Like, you're gonna have to play this one differently than that. They need that. It's like when companies got on social media and they needed to hire somebody, be like, nah, don't post that. Like, they need that. They need that person in the room, because clearly there's no presence of somebody like that who has any sway in the organization. They keep doing stuff where I'm like, why would you do that?
That would be a busy job, because they do consistently like to draft players with character concerns. So you'd be constantly explaining yourself. You're like, no, guys, okay, this one, we promise. We've really looked into it. It's okay.
Yeah, like, they need a "Are you sure?" button on each draft pick. But that's been, I think, a pretty good talk about kind of why this Browns team has been so polarizing, outside of the obvious, them being 2-7, right? But we've lived through 2-7. 2-7 ain't always this angry, right? Like, this is the angriest 2-7 I have ever seen with the fan base, and I've seen this team go winless. So I think it's a good conversation to have, even if you're somebody who wants to keep Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. I think you have to accept that this is something that needs to change about how they operate, because if you're somebody especially who believes in what they're doing, you should look at this and go, hey, they should not be this polarizing. It's not that people are stupid. They're doing stuff that makes them mad, right? Like, because the people who are mad aren't people I think to be stupid when I see them in my comment section. I'm like, no, they're mad, and it's their fault. It's not their fault. It's the organization's fault, because they're not explaining these things well. And it's like, I can only do so much to try to explain it, and I'm not in the organization. Right. Like, so it's not even my job to do it, right? I just can be able to, I can understand what they're trying to do at times. But I think that's, if you're pro Kevin Stefanski, anti Kevin Stefanski, I think these things matter, because if they do these things, you'll be happier with where you are as a franchise, and hopefully more stable and better in the long run. But this is something they got to get to, right? And it took them a long time to get to this point, but they got to get to this. They got to solve it. Thank you, Ab, for coming on. Make sure you follow Ab on all of her social medias and on YouTube. I'm going to try to tag your YouTube channel in here when I upload it, but make sure y'all check it out. So it's going to be a clickable thing in the title of the video at the top or at the bottom if you're watching on mobile. So make sure you check that out. Give her a subscribe. Check out what she's doing there. Also check out the OBR, where we both do stuff for the Cleveland Browns there. And I think we do things I think I know with Brad Ward. Check that show out. I think it's a video just released as we were talking and recording it. So go check out the OBR. We got something there too cooked up. But y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.